This is Short Circuit, a platforming arcade game I've been developing with a small group of friends. Inspired by the likes of older arcade titles, players take on the role of specialized electricians, working for Recharge Inc. to collect orbs of electricity and deposit them into the right collectors, all while avoiding the many hazards of the facility. My name is James, and this is the beginning of a series of videos talking about this project as it is being developed. Without further ado, let's begin this series by discussing the early history of Short Circuit. So to answer the question, what is Short Circuit? Short Circuit is a high-score based arcade platformer programmed in the Game Maker Studio 2 engine. Like many of my other projects, Short Circuit originally started as just a name while I was in the middle of a creative brainstorming session. The name is a play on short circuit, a term associated with instances of electrical malfunction, and the word sort, or to organize. When this idea originally popped into my head, I really wanted to focus on the sort aspect of the title. The early ideas for the game were to make it an electric-based puzzle game, and the ideas I originally had would be for moving around tiles on a grid to connect batteries and power sources together based on color, similar to a game like Pipe Dream. This idea didn't last very long, as I figured that while a puzzle game would be interesting with this concept, I wanted to develop a more hands-on and action-oriented style of gameplay, so it was back to the drawing board. When pitching new ideas for the game, I began by thinking of a small, bite-sized experience, akin to old arcade games that I grew up playing. I've always had a fascination with older arcade games, and decided that Short Circuit would follow suit with the designs of those games. A simple and easy-to-understand loop where the objective is to earn a high score against increasingly difficult challenges. When looking through older arcade games to get inspiration for my project, one game stood out against the others, the original 1983 Mario Bros. In that game, you control Mario and Luigi in the sewers under New York, jumping up underneath platforms to flip over the various creatures causing problems in the pipes. The game is just this simple loop of flipping enemies over and kicking them to get points, and while the environment is always one screen that wraps around in on itself, the increasing difficulty with new enemies that have different behaviors and come in varying numbers, plus the limited use POW block that offers up strategy and planning is what keeps the game interesting. With this game used as inspiration, I had to pitch the idea of how this would relate to the theme of organizing electrical sources, and so the core loop of gameplay would be established. I began work on the game itself by putting together a basic character controller in a single screen environment. The player could move around and jump, with special blocks on both sides of the level that would teleport the player back around to the other side. As the player walks around the level, they would need to collect sparks as they fall out of generators. These sparks would have a colored aura around them, and the player would need to take these sparks and bring them over to the correctly colored collector in order to get points. Every level would also have a specified number of sparks to collect before the level would end. With that, we have established a core gameplay loop around gaining points and finishing the level. Now it's time to find ways to keep this loop interesting and engaging. The first addition would be some sort of obstacle that would get in the way of the player completing their objective, and in this case, it would be some form of enemy. To come up with an enemy, we would first need to think of how they would engage with the main loop we have set in place. To go back to Mario Bros for a second, the enemies in that game have their own behaviors that the player needs to work around. Shell creepers just walk around and only take one hit to knock them over. Sidesteppers take 2 hits and get faster after the first, and fighter flies jump, which keep them from getting hit at all. The player needs to assess how they interact with these enemies because of these behaviors, but they are functionally the same, as they all need to be knocked over and then kicked to defeat them. A similar comparison can be made with Galaga. Your objective is to shoot down all the alien ships that appear in the pattern, but each one is slightly different. Some shoot projectiles on the way up or while swooping down to the player, some split into multiple enemies, some make a U-turn after passing the ship, or some try to abduct the player's ship. I wanted the enemies to fit the theme of electricity, and I also needed a way to handle enemies appearing in a way that players could appropriately handle their presence and work around their own weaknesses. So the first enemy came into creation in the form of the Rolling Thunder. These angry orbs spawn out of the same generators as normal sparks do, but you'll be able to identify them with a unique spawning animation and sound effect. As soon as the Rolling Thunder spawns, they follow where the player is at a constant speed through walls. Once they are within range, they begin a charging animation while being immobilized. After charging, they unleash a burst of energy that would damage the player before getting tired out, at which point they could be carried by players, potentially thrown into a collector to make it despawn and get some bonus points. The Rolling Thunder would serve as a constant threat around players, specifically programmed to begin spawning in based on how many sparks are currently on the field. Another enemy I planned around is the Jelly Squish, which would spawn from the wraparound areas and constantly float around the stage as a mobile hazard. However, it's slow, you'll easily know when it spawns in because of a special icon appearing on the wraparounds, and it can be jumped on in order to knock it down to, like the Rolling Thunder, score some additional points. These two won't be the only enemies in Short Circuit, but they'll be persistent threats that keep players planning around how they move through the level. The next area to improve upon would be the scoring system, and the idea for it would be a concept shared with other high-score based games, a combo system. By depositing sparks into the correct collectors in a short time span, the player would get increasingly higher amounts of points. Later down the line, we could also break down the code for depositing sparks to account for different ways to earn bonus points, such as a long shot bonus based on distance from the throw, or a hot hand bonus for quickly picking up the spark before throwing it. Other bonus points can be earned based on attributes by different characters, but we'll get into character specifics another time. This method of acquiring bonus points in different ways based on character abilities and level geometry constantly changing would offer players plenty of strategy to plan around as they go about the level in order to get the most points possible. Moving on, with this gameplay loop established, I was also able to create a small synopsis for the setting of the game. In this world, appliances are powered by living balls of electricity called sparks. However, sparks don't have an infinite source of energy. That is where a company called Recharge Inc. comes into play, offering a service to take in sparks and giving them the energy to continue functioning. Now, handling electricity is a dangerous task, and Recharge Inc. only employs what they call electricians, who have special talents in handling sparks to work efficiently and without risk. The story is simple, to the point, and directly connects to the main objective the player is tasked to follow, much like the old arcade games it is taking inspiration from. Lastly, I would like to discuss the team working on this game. I began working on Short Circuit as a solo developer, handling all of the programming and art assets myself. Shortly into development, I also brought along two of my friends, Jestro and Mixcaliber, to handle composing the music for this game, which you heard throughout the background of this video, and I am incredibly thankful for them for helping me out. I'd also like to thank my friends and associates on the Gigasword Discord server. They're all incredibly talented designers and artists, and I'm thankful to have them for feedback on the ideas of this game as it was being developed. That's about all I have to say about the early history of Short Circuit. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next devlog where we'll be taking a look into the art design of the game and the characters. See you then.